All right, we thought we'd begin with some music. So this first song is called 1821. It's a song that we originally wrote for a podcast that you might be familiar with called More Perfect. It's produced by WNYC, the same folks behind Radiolab. And what they normally do is cover major Supreme Court cases and kind of dive in deeply about them. But for a recent season, what they decided they wanted to do instead was to have a modern day adaptation of Schoolhouse Rock, where they would get artists from all across the country to each tackle one of the 27 amendments. And of course, if you're familiar with our story, you can probably guess which one they asked us to do, the First Amendment. But I thought that was a little too obvious, and I selfishly wanted to do two amendments instead, the 18th and the 21st Amendment. Now, does anyone here know what the 18th Amendment is? Oh, see, this is why we need public education. 18th Amendment was a prohibition, and the 21st Amendment repealed it. And I just thought it was such a beautiful metaphor, because when you're a kid, you think like, when I turn 18, I'm gonna be able to do whatever I want. Turns out you can't even go down the street and buy a beer, not until you turn 21. So this song's really a story of growing up, and it's a story of America growing up, learning to test where those boundaries and where those rules ought to be. So if you're interested in the song, we have it on our newest album, but it's also available on something called 27, The Most Perfect Album, where we're joined with artists like Dolly Parton, each tackling one of these amendments, and we highly, highly recommend it.
Remember counting the days, remember grasping for moments. Freedom was a digit away. Remember thinking the world closed up on you like an eyelid, peering through, seeing through. Remember when you were teenage, staring up at the ceiling, emotions like a runaway train. Remember making the promise to yourself not to be cautious, thoughtless and wondering. Watchful eyes, they are misjudged. One breath, you're on the cusp. You were 18, now you're 21. Drew their lines and they changed their minds. You were 18, now you're 21. Housed by rules, now you're free to run. You were 18, now you're 21. Drew their lines and they changed their minds. You were 18, now you're 21. Housed by rules, now you're free. Remember when people told you that you can't be dreaming? The present luxury's fading like the air that you're breathing. Remember when you were 3, filling your lung without question? First time that you fell in the sea, and could you ever imagine if they board up the ocean? The cracks come immediately. The watchful eyes, they are misjudged. One breath, you're on the cusp. You were 18, now you're 21. Drew their lines and they changed their minds. You were 18, now you're 21. Housed by rules, now you're free to run. You were 18, now you're 21. Drew their lines and they changed their minds. You were 18, now you're 21. Housed by rules, now you're free. One day they'll see you were 18, now you're 21. Drew their lines and they changed their mind. You were 18, now you're 21. Housed by rules, now you're free to run. You were 18, now you're 21. Drew their lines and they changed their minds. You were 18, now you're 21. Housed by rules, rules, now you're free to run. You were 18, now you're 21. Drew their lines and they changed their minds. You were 18, now you're 21. Housed by rules, now you're free to run. You're free to run. Thank you.
You know, it's been about 2 years since I lived in Oregon. I moved to Tennessee a little bit ago, and just coming back here in fall is absolutely perfect. And is a good reminder of what I'm missing out on. Not just like decent food, but amazing weather. So it's wonderful to be back in the area. So this next song is a song called "Fight Back." It's a song that is on our album, the band Who Must Not Be Named. And we released this about 2 years ago, and it was really just kind of our way of like encouraging folks to stand up for themselves. Something that we've kind of learned the hard way that we needed to do throughout our particular career.
Reaching out, reaching through, goes the hands in abandoned rooms. Where's the charge? How the march faked you out with fits and signs. Don't let the words this way, don't let the text prevail. Don't let the weakness of others infect your health. Don't be their alibis, don't feed their greedy mouth. If it's time, then it's now. Stand up tall and fight back, rather than just sit back. Fly your way through the feedback. Don't get caught in that, don't get caught in that. Just react, heart and mind remain intact. To the no when I retract. Lead the pack as it's your time now, it's your time now. Look within, it's broken piece. You create what you wanted to see. Shuttered eyes, shuttered minds. Can't see, can't feel inside. Don't let the words this way, don't let the text prevail. Don't let the weakness of others infect your health. Don't be their alibis, don't feed their greedy mouth. If it's time, then it's now. Stand up tall and fight back, rather than just sit back. Claw your way through the feedback. Don't get caught in that, don't get caught in that. Just react, heart and mind remain intact. To the no will not retract. Lead the pack as it's your time now, it's your time now. Fight back, rather than just sit back. Claw your way through the feedback. Don't get caught in that, don't get caught in that. Just react, heart and mind remain intact. To the no will not retract. Lead the pack as it's your time now, it's your time now. I gotta go blow my nose, sorry.
He's overcoming like a sinus infection or something. So on that album that I mentioned, we actually kick it off with a song called From the Heart. And it is a song that I think was a long time coming, but one that is particularly difficult to write. You see, it was our song that became an open letter to the U.S. government and the U.S. Trademark Office about our particular struggle. The problem is, when you're writing laws that were drafted in 1942, the obscure provisions of the Lanham Act is not the most exciting stuff for a song. So I tried writing it, and I struggled with it for the longest time. had a bunch of demo versions of this that I scrapped, and eventually Joe took it over and just wrote a new song, which ended up becoming From the Heart, because my song was absolutely horrible.
Well, you were trying really hard to like start every letter with like a verse.
I wanted an anagram
that spelled out
I like
USPTO.
anagrams.
And then it was just like random words at that point. You're just like, what starts with a P? And then you just put a P there. Like, that is not a song.
You know, one day maybe we'll write a song that's entirely a palindrome.
No, they've done that before.
See, we can do that.
I'm pretty sure.
But this song is called From the Heart. And so we want to invite you to be a part of this. We're going to ask you to sing along. But all you have to do is know one word. So when we point at you, you just yell out the word no. Let's try it. 3, 2, 1. That's actually pretty good. See, you already know the song, so we'll let you know when to jump in.
Sorry if my note's too sharp. Sorry if my note's too raw. Don't make the pen a weapon and censor our intelligence until our thoughts mean nothing at all. Sorry if you take offense. You made our bruise and blade pretend. We know you fear change. It's something so strange, but nothing's gonna get in our way. There's no room for your backwards feelings and backyard dealings. We're never gonna settle, never gonna settle, and
no,
we won't remain silent.
No.
It's our defining moment. We sing from the heart.
We sing from the heart.
Yeah, we sing from the heart.
We sing from the no.
We won't be complacent.
No.
It's a rock and roll nation. We sing from the heart.
We sing from the heart.
Yeah, we sing from the heart. You know you're good when you try to sing the no even when it's not time to sing the no, because you're in it.
Anticipate. It's a town of musicians.
Sorry if we try too hard to take some power back for ours. The language of oppression will lose to education until the words can hurt us again. Sorry if you take offense, but silence will not make amends. The system's all wrong and it won't be long before the kids are singing our songs. There's no room for your backwards feelings and backyard dealings. We're never gonna settle, never gonna settle, and we won't remain silent.
No.
It's our defining moment. We sing from the heart.
We sing from the heart.
Yeah, we sing from the heart. No, we won't be complacent. No, it's a rock and roll nation. We sing from the heart. Yeah, we sing from the heart.
It's funny because we did this song at the National Constitution Center on Constitution Day, which was like 2 months ago, for a bunch of middle schoolers who were like super, super wiggly. But it was like their favorite part because they just loved yelling at us the whole time.
They started singing the other songs too, and they never heard them before.
Yeah, we didn't even have to teach them how to do it. They just got into it, just caught up on some words and just kept yelling.
Kids these days. 1, 2, 3, go! We won't remain silent. It's our defining moment. We sing from the heart.
We sing from the heart.
Yeah, we sing from the heart. And no, we won't be complacent. No, it's a rock and roll nation. We sing from the heart.
We sing from the heart.
Yeah, we sing from the a cappella style. Go, no, we won't remain silent.
No.
It's our defining moment. We sing from the heart. We sing from the heart. And no, we won't be complacent.
No.
It's a rock and roll nation. We sing from the heart. We sing from the heart. No. Yes. Thank you.
So we'll do one more for you. And this is something that Joe and I have been working on for some time. So about a year and a half ago, someone reached out to me who happened to be an actor and director and writer who does a lot of Broadway musicals. Like, he emailed me saying, I don't know if you're familiar with things like Les Miserables or Phantom of the Opera. And I'm like, of course I'm familiar with these things. Well, it turns out he starred and directed in a lot of these things. And he wanted to write a Broadway musical based on my life and our band's journey to the Supreme Court, which, of course, my response was like, sure, just please don't make it about a white band. He agreed, was very gracious about it, and also said I didn't want really much to do with the script at all. I just wanted to let him do it. But I did say the music is really important. And so he asked Joe and I to begin writing a bunch of songs for this thing. Like, he had the script and different scenarios, and we would just come up with songs. So this next song is one that we've been workshopping and kind of playing around with for some time. It's to give you a little preview of what's to come. Hopefully one day. It might never make it in, and in that case, then you get to see it, no one else does. So, imagine that we're not here at Reed College, but we're in those classic old theaters in New York City, like right off of Times Square. Actually, the seating here is perfect for that because it's like amphitheater style. And on the set before you is actually a Chinese restaurant. Like, that's what I grew up in. My parents owned one, and I'm talking like old school Chinese restaurants. So like everything is red vinyl booths, except for the golden dragons and that sort of thing on the walls. And in this scene, I am with my old band, the band that I had been touring with for some time, that I dropped out of college to join. And I decide that I'm quitting. I'm sick of it because all they care about is fortune and fame. And so I don't want anything to do with it anymore. But it's okay, because I have an idea for a new band, an Asian American band. And of course, that band eventually becomes the Slants. But this song is from that moment.
2 years and 100 gigs. All I got is a demo and a beat-up rig. Why the hell did I drop out of school for this? $40 and 40 fights. We spilled our blood but never saw our name in lights. I gave everything but only got regrets. I'm sick of pleasing everyone. I'm gonna write new songs, I'm gonna change our sound, I'm gonna take a chance, I'm gonna take a stand, I'm gonna start again, I'm gonna start again, I'm gonna start a new band. I can see it all so clearly, I want the world to stop and hear me. No apologies. I can feel the rhythm building, like the pulse my heart is beating. They'll sing the song I sing.
So here's the thing. Ever since I was a little kid, all I wanted to do was play music. Like, seriously, my parents have these home videos of me where I would grab my dad's acoustic guitar, jump up on the coffee table, and pretend to play, even before I could speak. And instead of playing games like Cops and Robbers, I would get my cousins and my sister, and we would play band. We'd get all the newspapers and junk mail that came into the house and spread it out across the floor to create a stage. And that's what we would stand on. And we would just scream at the top of our lungs because that's what we thought rock stars did. I remember looking at that television set and thinking, Mom, that's gonna be me one day.
Since 4 years old, I've had this dream, built a Roxy stage from photos of a magazine. I said, Mom, one day I'll be on MTV. For years I played till my fingers bleed, but that's no way to earn a PhD. If he only knew what that doubt did to me. Well, I'm sick of pleasing everyone. I'm gonna storm some streets, I'm gonna make some trouble, gonna take a chance, I'm gonna take a stand, I'm gonna start again, I'm gonna start again, I'm gonna start a new band. I can see it all so clearly, I want the world to stop and hear me. No apologies. I can feel the rhythm building, like the pulse my heart is beating. We'll sing the song I sing. I know this has not been done. Our faces are hidden, our voices unspoken, but I'm not just anyone. They'll know our names, will have representation. The unheard will stand and rock on.
Now, here's the thing. If you dropped out of college right before graduating, like I did, to join a punk band, well, the idea of starting yet another band, your parents also would not be wild about that one.
You think you're such a punk rock? I think the code's helping with this part. Like it lowers the voice. You think you're such a punk rock roller, but Simon, you are getting older. Where is your degree?
When you have a wife and baby and a big house in the city,
It's called responsibility.
I still believe in this rock and roll dream.
10 years from now, believe on a center stage, I'll sing for our community. Yeah, maybe then you'll see what I was meant to be. You talk about responsibility, you don't care about the music, you're so full of greed. But you never take that dream away from me. I can see it all so clearly. I want the world to stop and hear me. With no apologies. I can feel the rhythm building, like the pulse my heart is beating. I'll sing the song I sing.
So in this part of the musical, all the kitchen staff begins walking out. They're actually all my relatives. They all work for my parents. And they decide to take a side of this whole thing by joining my parents and admonishing me using the power of song. So we want to invite you to join in on this. You're now a part of this Broadway cast. You're now the kitchen staff and my relatives joining in on this. All you have to do is sing along with these few simple words. Simon, you are getting older. Let's try it.
You are getting older, Simon. You are getting
Oh, you don't have to sing it at me.
Keep singing in nice harmonies. I can see it all so clearly. I want the world to stop and hear me. With no apologies. I can feel the rhythm building, like the pulse my heart is beating. We'll sing the song I sing. 10 years from now, believe on the Reed College stage, I'll sing for our community. I didn't find out what the room is called.
I think we're in Vellum Hall.
On the Vellum Hall stage, I'll sing for our community. Maybe then you'll see what I was meant to be. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you so much for spending your Friday, a late afternoon, early evening with us, traveling around the country and speaking and sharing my story about what it was like for us to go to the Supreme Court is something that I do fairly often now. So I find myself in a lot of law schools and talking to judges and attorneys and that sort of thing. But I also find myself in community centers and community colleges and advocacy organizations all talking about these same ideas as well, because I think there's certain themes that are about the story that transcend just a novel Supreme Court case. But I oftentimes like to begin that story in a different place, one that still has to do with law, but that looks very, very different. And that place is the Oregon State Penitentiary. You see, in 2011, our band was invited to play at OSP, the maximum security prison here in Oregon. Now, as a Johnny Cash fan, I was pretty excited about this. I was like, I'm gonna wear all black that day. This is gonna be our Folsom Prison Blues moment. Now, I didn't really think about what it would mean to send an all-Asian band into a prison with one of the highest populations of neo-Nazis in this country. Didn't think it might be particularly dangerous, even as we were signing away those waiver forms saying we wouldn't sue them, if we got injured, or I think the word was shanked or killed. I just thought, this is gonna be a lot of fun. But it didn't cross my mind until we were going through our second set of metal detectors. And then at that point, all our IDs were taken from us. And instead, we were given these bright orange vests with these big numbers on them, like we were gonna go play flag football or something. Now, one of my bandmates looks at the guard and says, hey, it's summer, it's really hot out, and we wear a bunch of layers when we're performing. Is it okay to remove the safety gear? Now, the guard looks at us, and he says, sure. But if something happens out there, those vests let us know who not to shoot. So, of course, I'm like, yo, can I get 2 of them vests? Because I don't want to lose mine. And I start getting filled with nerves, anxiety, and fear because I realized that I don't know anything about prisons or prisoners. Like, the only stuff I knew came from books, television shows, and movies. And let's just say they did not have very good things to say about the institutions or the people inside them. And so we eventually get led through this prison and end up at what they call the Big Yard. Now, the Big Yard is the size of a couple of football fields in length. It's surrounded by 30-foot high walls all around. You can see razor wire, searchlights, and mounts for weapons. At the end of the Big Yard is a small concrete stage. That's where we're supposed to perform. Now, I astutely noted that the only thing that was going to be separating us from nearly 2,000 inmates were these little orange safety cones and a thin line of yellow police tape that said, "Police, do not cross." Of course, I'm like, I don't know if they follow these kinds of instructions. I mean, that's why they're here, right? They literally can't follow the right kinds of instructions. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because we take the stage, and whenever we do, when we have a chance to share the thing that we are the most passionate about, our art, our music, we're not thinking about the criminal status of the people that we're playing for. We're just sharing that moment, something that's really meaningful to us. And so we begin celebrating with these prisoners there. They're enjoying their only hour of outdoor time that day, spending it with us. So the fact that they're there, it's quite special. And because they're on such good behavior, the guards actually double the amount of time they get that day. I'll never forget looking out at this audience as we launch into our cover of Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones, and just watching as the sea of orange and denim began bouncing up and down to the music.
I see a red door and I want to paint it black. No colors anymore, I want it to turn black. I see the girls walk by dressed in their summer clothes. I have to turn my head until my darkness goes.
Now, at the end of the concert, I'm hanging out by one of those safety cones, like on the safe side, of course. And I noticed as this group of very large, shirtless white men start approaching. They're covered head to toe in tattoos, but I can't really make out what they are until they get closer and closer. The man in front has 2 words carved into his chest: white power. I start getting filled with those nerves again. I look for my band, and they're 20 feet behind me breaking down equipment. I look for the guard, the one who's been helping us out all day, and he's breaking up a different fight 50 feet away. I turn back around, and the man is just an arm's length away from me. Now, he looks a bit nervous himself, and then he hands me a piece of paper and a very sharp pencil. I'm frozen. Like, the only thing going through my mind at that moment is that scene in Jurassic Park where they're like, if you don't move, the T-Rex won't see you. A little late for that now. But then he says those few words that just cuts right through me. It's for my daughter. Will you please sign it? So I said, of course. And as I take the paper, I noticed it's a makeshift flyer of our band's performance at that prison that day. And I began asking him questions, things like, what's your daughter's name? What grade is she in? What's her favorite animal? And really trying to avoid questions like, so why are you in here? Because seemed kind of obvious, couldn't follow instructions. But as we're having this short exchange, and as I'm giving this paper back to him, he looks at me and he says, the fact that you'd come in here and share your music with us and talk to me, this is pretty incredible. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and they're ones that I don't want my little girl to make. I can't change what's stained in my skin, but I could change what's in my heart. It was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had as a musician. We both walked in there full of assumptions. I'm sure him and his friends had all kinds of thoughts going through their mind when they saw a bunch of Asian guys taking that stage. And I was literally judging him by his skin. I mean, granted, it said white power up in there, but I was full of assumptions until we had a chance to engage, to talk, and see the humanity in each other. When we did that, we both left changed that day. Now, I started the Slants in 2006 because I wanted to change people's assumptions about Asian Americans. You see, I grew up in San Diego, California in the 1980s. And back then, we didn't have the same kind of social representation that we have today. I mean, this is decades before Always Be My Maybe, or Fresh Off the Boat, or Crazy Rich Asians were killing it in the theaters. Back then, the only kind of representation we had in the media were actors like Mickey Rooney, a white actor taping his eyes back and making a ridiculous accent, people thinking it was funny. Or characters like Long Duck Dong and 16 Candles, overt racial stereotypes. That was the only kind of representation we had. And so as a result, I was bullied numerous times as a kid. I'll never forget this one particular memory. It's 7th grade, and back then, we used to alternate this particular task of cleaning up the yard while everyone else would go hit the showers and get ready for class. Well, on this particular day, it was my turn. And as I'm picking up those volleyball nets and those basketballs, I could feel myself being shoved to the ground. And I turn around, and there's 4 guys standing over me. And the thing that actually terrifies me the most is that they're grinning. They're enjoying that moment. And that's when it begins. Just again and again and again. They hit me in the face, they kick me in the stomach, they throw sand in my eyes, all while yelling 2 words again and again: Jap and Gook. I'm terrified. I don't really know what to do until at one point something in me just snaps. I look at them and I said, I'm a chink. That's how stupid you are. You can't even be racist properly. They were so shocked, they turned and walked away. You see, I believe there's power in claiming an identity. There's power in saying, you don't get to define who I am. Only I get to do that. I choose the words that I want to be associated with. You don't get to define that for me. And I think some part of that lesson carried through as I entered high school. Now, high school, of course, was where I discovered punk rock and where I fell in love with the Ramones.
Well, I don't care about history. Rock and roll high school, 'cause that's not where I wanna be. Rock and roll high school. I just wanna have some kicks. I just wanna get some chicks. Rock and roll high school.
Now, high school is where I met Kyle. Kyle and I happened to be some of the only punk rockers in our school, maybe in the city, because this is long before Hot Topic had hit the mall. So the idea of me having this homemade wallet chain created out of safety pins, nobody thought this was cool. Nobody except for Kyle. Now, one day Kyle shows up, and he's got hot pink hair and spiked all over his head like Liberty spikes. And I was like, Kyle, you look so cool. You're so punk. Well, no one else at the school felt the same way that day, because all day long he got dirty looks from students and teachers alike, all these comments. Now, I was supposed to meet Kyle after school this day, but I was running a bit behind. By the time I got there, in the front of the school where parents pick up all their kids, a very familiar scene was unfolding before me. Kyle, now surrounded by almost a dozen guys, all pushing him around, saying terrible things. Saying things like, what are you, some kind of fag or something? You a queer? What's wrong with you? Now, at one point, someone says, how come your mom lets you walk out the door looking like that? And so I decided to jump in. I said, hey, maybe it's because his mom's not stupid and ignorant like you. Maybe she doesn't judge people by what they look like, but by what's on the inside. Now, I thought this was an excellent answer. They did not agree. They instead turned towards me. They started pushing me around. What are you going to do? What are you going to do, Jackie? You want some of this? Over and over again, they called me Jackie. And I was like, my name's Simon. Like, I'm in classes with a couple of you. You know that's not my name. But that's when I realized they were calling me Jackie Chan. And all I could think was, I'm not Jackie Chan. Like, the man is significantly older than me. He's got this bulbous nose from being busted so many times from doing all those stunts. But more important, Jackie knows something that I do not. Martial arts. Like, he could school all these guys in a minute. I took 1 week of karate camp with my cousins, and they gave me a belt out of pity. Wasn't going to help me out here. But I thought back on that 7th grade day, and I thought, maybe. So I struck the one karate pose that I could remember, and they immediately backed off, saying, whoa, 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 whoa. We're just messing with you. Simon, right? We're in classes with you. It was the second time that claiming a stereotype actually helped me out. Now, I wish I could say that all of my experiences through the K-12 system were met with cleverness, and bravery, and wit. But the reality is that growing up in San Diego, things almost always ended the same way, with me running away, finding a place to hide, and crying because I didn't want to get hit again. In 11th grade, I walked up to my dad and said, Dad, I'm ashamed of being Chinese. I'm just tired of getting killed out there. And it broke his heart because my parents worked so hard for me and my siblings. But at that point, I just didn't want anything to do with my culture anymore. And so fast forward a few years, I'm a senior in college with a double major on a full-ride scholarship at UC Riverside, and I do the unthinkable thing. I drop out, I move across the country to join a punk rock band in Portland, Oregon. Now, nobody told me before I moved that Portland has this nickname. Some of you might be familiar with it. We call it America's whitest major city. And there in America's whitest major city, I started missing hearing my first languages, the food, obviously, and of course, seeing anyone that looked like me, anyone who might be able to relate to some of the experiences that I had. So to deal with this kind of loneliness, I would import movies, like VHS tapes, via eBay, like sent to me from Hong Kong to deal with the loneliness. I mean, mostly films with like this dude, because Jackie's a straight up badass, but like that's what I had. And around this time period, some of my friends said, hey, Simon, have you ever watched the movie Kill Bill? I said, no, I missed it in the theater. But I bought it the day it came out. It's April 2004. I'm sitting in my Portland, Oregon apartment, watching it as this bright yellow disc of these 3 black lines slide into the DVD player. And as the film kicks off, it's got witty banter, it's got decent action. I mean, it's a Tarantino film. But there's this one particular scene where this woman named Oranishi begins walking in with her gang of crazy 88s. It's the Yakuza, or the Asian mafia that she led. Now, to anybody else, this is just another trademark Quentin Tarantino scene. The music is kicking, you know something is gonna go down. But for me, it was different. It struck me, and that's when I realized it was the first time in my whole life that I had ever seen an American-produced film that showed Asians as cool, confident, and sexy. I thought, if Hollywood is bad, Well, the music industry is worse. I mean, there are over 17 million Asian Americans, and we'd never been profiled in Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, Spin, Billboard, or even MTV back when they used to play music videos. That night, in the middle of the film, I decided something needed to change. That was the night where an idea for an Asian American band was born. Now, Band 101. If you want to have a band, you got to have a name. So I started asking my friends in America's whitest major city, what's something you think all Asian people have in common? And again, the answer was the same: slanted eyes. Slanted eyes. I thought this was interesting because, first of all, it's not true. Like, not all Asian people have slanted eyes. Also, we're not the only people on the planet with any kind of slant to our eyes. But more importantly, it was these eyes. It was these facial features that got me beat up in school again and again. I always associated slanted eyes with shame. And because Asians are the most bullied demographic in American schools, I knew I wasn't alone. What if we could change it? What if we could flip it around from feelings of embarrassment to those of empowerment, from shame to an identity that people could be proud of? And so the idea for the Slants was born. We could sing about our perspective or our slant on life of what it's like to be people of color navigating the music industry, all while reappropriating this outdated racial stereotype. What happened next, I don't think I could have ever predicted. We launched this thing on myspace.com, which lets you know how far back this band goes. And almost immediately, the letters started pouring in. Asian kids from across the country started writing me, saying thank you. Thank you for existing. Thank you for showing me that I could be something else. Thank you for sharing your own stories of being bullied and letting me know that it gets better. I mean, I didn't intend on starting a social political project, but when I saw all those letters, I realized that whether we liked it or not, we were going to be held to this particular standard. And so we started getting involved with our community. We started working with Asian American organizations across this country, getting involved with movements, especially around anti-bullying work. And I started enrolling in classes on anti-racism work, diversity, equity, inclusion, and of course, counseling. Because I was actually dealing with kids who were experiencing trauma, kids who were too ashamed to talk to their parents or to their schools, were turning to the band they found online that they felt like they could connect with. And so I started doing this, and it became so incredibly rewarding. And for the first time in my life, I started seeing two different worlds start merging in one: art and activism. And I'll never forget, in 2008, NPR did their very first story on this. They talked about this Asian American band that was touring while turning stereotypes upside down and building a geek army. Now, they called it a geek army because we were playing at anime and video game conventions. Now we're doing like talks around political science in the Supreme Court, so different kind of geek army, but a geek army nonetheless. And as this was going on, we decided to incorporate some of our stories into our music as well. You see, the lead singer and I had some very parallel experiences. Kids used to come up to us and say, Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these. And they'd pull their eyes back in a slant eye gesture in this horrific schoolyard rhyme. But what if we could take it, flip it on its head, and turn it into an anthem of self-pride instead? And that's where the song Sakura Sakura was born.
We sing for the Japanese and the Chinese and all the dirty knees. Can you see me? We sing in harmony. We sing for the Japanese and the Chinese and all the dirty knees. Can you see me? We sing in harmony.
Everything was going so well until, as it often does, I became friends with an attorney. So, Spencer Trowbridge, he's an IP attorney in Portland, Oregon, still a good friend of mine today. Like, I literally talked to him yesterday. He sees all this stuff going on. He says, Simon, have you ever thought about applying to register for your trademark? And I'm like, sounds kind of expensive, Spencer. But he says, no. It's a few $100, and in like 6 months, this whole thing's gonna be over with. Turned out a little different. This is in 2009 as we were gathering all this paperwork. In spring of 2010, Spencer calls me up. Hey, Simon, we got a problem with your application. I'm like, what is it? He says, well, the trademark office, they say that the name of your band is disparaging to persons of Asian descent. And I'm like, does disparaging mean what I think it means? Are they saying we're racist to Asian people? And he says, yeah. And I'm like, do they know we're of Asian descent? And he says, yeah, I think that's kind of obvious. I'm like, I didn't even know there was a law against this. What does it actually say? And he proceeds to read me Section 2A of the Lanham Act, written in 1942, which says that you can't register trademarks that are considered scandalous, immoral, or disparaging. In this case, it's disparaging. But it's not just what anyone considers to be disparaging. They have to find what's called a substantial composite of the reference group. So in this case, a whole lot of Asian people have to be upset about the name in order for them to deny me this right. So of course, I'm like, man, we just spent the last couple of years touring with our community, doing all these festivals and outreach programs. Who did they find who was offended? And that's when he tells me, nobody. Like, wait, what do you mean nobody? You just told me they have to find a substantial composite. I said, nobody. But they did quote urbandictionary.com. And there's photos of Miley Cyrus pulling her eyes back in a slant eye gesture. And of course, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Like the kind of stuff that isn't even acceptable in the junior high classroom is now being used by the federal government to deny me rights? He's like, yeah, but I think they're wrong. I think we can appeal. If we could just show them how your community is actually supporting your work, I think we can change their mind on it. So let's go ahead and file that appeal. Let's go ahead and fight back. Now think about this. How would you prove that you're not offensive to yourself? What kind of evidence would you bring to the table? In our case, we got academics, so Asian American professors who specialize in cultural studies, talking about movements, especially those around reappropriation in my community, and talking about how the Slants was a part of it, and oftentimes leading the charge on some of this work. We got dictionary experts, like linguistics professionals, such as the president of the American Dialect Society and editor at the New American Oxford Dictionary, who wrote a 70-page paper on the history of the term slant, showing how even in the height of its use in the 30s and 40s, it wasn't that common. But more often than not, especially in the last 30 years, it was used as this self-referential, empowering kind of term. We got executive directors of numerous Asian American organizations who said the slants don't disparage Asian identity, they celebrate it. This is also included incarceration camp survivors as well. We also got event organizers, people who use slant in their events, like the Slanted Kings of Comedy Tour, Slant Film Festival, the Slanted Screen, Slant TV, Slant Magazines, all showing how they did not receive a single complaint about their work. And on top of that, multiple independent, scientifically verified surveys that showed that 92 to 98% of Asian Americans supported our use of the name. It was the biggest appeal in US history on this kind of rejection. We sent all this in, and the trademark office said, you know what? It's not good enough. It's not good enough because urbandictionary.com says so. They also decided to step up their game and quoted something called AsianJokes.com. And they lifted the rhetoric from white supremacist website. With a few keystrokes, the government essentially wiped away the voices of my community, saying that our effort was laudable but not influential. They sent all this to me on December 22nd, and as part of this Christmas gift from the government, Spencer calls me up and says, Simon, law's really hard. I'm not going to renew my license next year. I'm going to take this in-house position, so you're going to have to find somebody else. So I looked around online, and I remembered there was this guy who blogged about us. You see, he had a trademark website for intellectual property law geeks called likelihoodofconfusion.com. And I was like, well, he seems smart. I reached out to him, and he agreed to take the case up pro bono. But he says, as long as you fight like this, you're not going to win. I'm like, what do you mean? Nobody's ever brought a survey to the table before. He's like, no, you're not going to win. Because here's the thing. No one who's been charged under this law has ever won on appeal. In the 70 years that the law has been around, not a single person. Think about it. The government says, we're going to put this law into place. If we get it wrong, you just correct us on it, and we'll fix the issue. But what they don't tell you is that you can never win. And so he says, you're not going to be the first. But he has a new idea. He says, let's go ahead and reapply. We'll abandon this application. We'll apply again, but this time we won't tell them it's for an Asian ban. Maybe they'll get a different examining attorney, the guy who works at the trademark office who reviews these applications. And maybe that person won't associate the slants with this outdated racial slur, and they'll go ahead and rubber stamp it through. They'll just give it to you just like anybody else. So we go ahead and reapply, and they give us the exact same examining attorney. That guy copies and pastes his previous rejection into the current one. So of course I'm livid, I'm frustrated. I'm like, it just set back our work by 2 years. But my attorney seems kind of amused by all of this. He's like, no, we caught them. We caught them. They just broke their own rules. You see, according to TEMP, the Trademark Examiner's Procedures Manual, they're supposed to do a fresh search every time a new application comes in. It's supposed to be a neutral search. You see, they do this to see how words and images are perceived in the marketplace and see if anyone else is doing it. Look at the evidence. None of it was neutral, and it definitely wasn't fresh. So as I looked at the screen caps provided to me by the trademark office, I looked and saw all of the evidence predated our application by 2 years. And on top of that, it definitely wasn't neutral, because the only time they ever found anything offensive in connection with the word slant was when they searched for slant, plus the word derogatory, plus the N-word, although that's not how our government wrote that one. And so we started appealing, saying, hold on a second, like, not only are you using this improperly, this procedural and evidentiary-based argument, but we decided to change the argument a little bit by shifting the kinds of questions asked. For example, we're like, if slant is this inherent racial slur that you claim it is, well, how come you gave it to everybody else? Literally, there have been over 800 applications at the trademark office for slant or variations of it. I'm the only person in all of U.S. history to be denied a registration for this word. So like, what is it about this band, the slants, that's different than slant no rant, or slant shack, or slanted records, or the slanted screen, or the slanted door, or all these other registrations that you have here? Well, the government came back and basically said that it's because we were just too Asian. Their exact words were, it is incontestable that the applicant is of Asian descent and part of an Asian band. Thus, there's an association with the definition. You see, in their minds, if people see the words the slants and they see our faces, well, they're going to automatically assume racial slur instead of any other possible definition in the dictionary. And they decided to prove this. They're like, if you look at the slants.com right now, there's Asian people all over that website. I'm like, yeah, that's me, that's my band. I'm like, well, if you look at their album covers and their flyers, there's dragons and pagodas and rising suns. I'm like, yeah, we're using the artwork of our respective cultural heritages to like comment on it. But for them, that just made us too Asian. Like if you were to actually chart out their logic, it would look something kind of like this. Like the more Asian we become by adding band members or imagery, the more racist we become to ourselves, apparently. And the problem is, our band didn't just happen to be a band with a couple of Asian dudes in it. The problem was that our band is like super duper Asian. You gotta remember, like people were calling us the world's first and only all Asian American dance rock band. We were getting involved with Asian American organizations across this country. Sometimes we would be doing that work on behalf of the US government. Some of you might remember in 2011, the reports of someone named Lieutenant Danny Chen, an Asian American soldier who was hazed to death. It turned out it was an epidemic across the armed forces. Well, guess who they called to do outreach for their soldiers? Us. We spent our 2011 and 2012 holidays with soldiers serving overseas. And when they wanted to reach out to the Asian American community to launch new anti-bullying programs, well, guess who the White House called? Us. So whenever the government needed us, we became that convenient conduit to our community. But for the trademark office, it just made us way too Asian. So we appealed using all these highly technical arguments, and we lost every single round of the way. As we get to something called the Federal Circuit, which is right below the Supreme Court, I mean, it is in Washington, D.C., across the street from the White House, we start preparing these arguments, but my attorney, Ron, is MIA. Totally disappears, not answering his phone or email. Turns out he had a medical emergency. So the junior associate, Joel McMull, steps up. And he says, you know, as a trademark attorney, you don't get to make a lot of constitutional arguments. So he decides to throw some in for practice. He says, well, maybe the government violated my due process rights, you know, using my race against me, something that they shouldn't be doing. But also maybe this law is violating my freedom of speech rights. The court, he thought, would totally ignore all of this stuff because the Federal Circuit, it's a very technical court. All they care about is these procedural kind of issues. So he thought, this is just for fun. Well, it turns out when we got to the court, they didn't care about any of our arguments. They're like, we don't care that they improperly did their searches. We don't care that they use your Asian ethnicity against you. We only care about one thing. Does Section 2A of the Lanham Act violate the First Amendment? And so we said, yeah. And there, 9 out of 12 federal judges agreed with us, striking the law down as unconstitutional. The problem is, 6 months after we win, we still didn't have that registration. That's because it turns out that the government, the trademark office, and their new BFFs, the Department of Justice, were filing suit to take me here. You know, the whole final boss stage of this legal journey. Now, all along, ever since I had started incorporating that activism into our art, we believed there were certain principles, certain values that we were fighting for. And I have to say that a lot of those things don't fit well into a legal brief or into oral arguments before a court. Some of these things were merely symbolic, but they were principles that were important to us nonetheless. For example, I was like, if the Supreme Court is going to be hearing arguments about what's offensive to Asian people, well, some Asian people better be up in there. They need to be able to look at us in the eyes and tell us that they know better than us what actually affects our community. And so we crowdfunded our way there, and our community generously poured out support, allowing us to afford the flights to DC. And we also decided to pour those arguments using the only kind of platform we had, which is our music. So we released an album, and we dedicated that album to the US government, called it The Band Who Must Not Be Named. And of course, we kick off that album with a song, From the Heart, our open letter not only to the US Patent and Trademark Office, but to anyone else that does not believe in the power of reappropriation, this idea that marginalized communities can use things like irony, satire, wit to neuter hate, to empower ourselves, to create a voice that we can stand behind. And so, with music and guitars in hand, we sent that message to the government with this song.
No, we won't remain silent, no. It's a defining moment. We sing from the heart. We sing from the heart. And no, we won't be complacent, no. It's a rock and roll nation. We sing from the heart. We sing from the heart.
Now, much to the chagrin of my attorneys, we played this song on the steps of the Supreme Court. Again, it's just another one of those things that we had to do. But it's okay because it was a national holiday. They kind of bend the rules a bit on those. You see, that was another one of those symbols. We released our album on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, just days before oral arguments at the Supreme Court, just days before the inauguration of our current president, in fact. And so to kind of help celebrate the release and to talk about these principles, we decided to take our guitars and go to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. That actually happens to be my favorite place in all of DC. And as we sang songs with the people who had gathered to celebrate the legacy of Dr. King, I decided to take some time out for myself. You see, by the time we got to DC, it was an entirely different band. Every other band member had walked away. I was the only original one left. I mean, some people got girlfriends, and that can kind of ruin bands. Other people said, Simon, we didn't join this to join a lawsuit. We joined this band because we wanted to have a music career. And so understandably, they walked away. And so while this new band, were passionate about the cause and they're passionate about the music, they just didn't have the same association that I did. They didn't have those early memories interacting with all those kids as they were growing up to our music. And so I walked around and I just looked and reflected on each of these quotes that are carved into marble in this memorial. And eventually my eyes fell upon my favorite quote from Dr. King. It says, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And I remember staring at those words and thinking, it's been 7.5 years that I've been in court, and I didn't even commit a crime. All I did was start a band called the Slants. While it's true that moral arc does bend, I realized that night that moral arc does not bend on its own. It requires patience, it requires persistence, and it requires people who not only understand their rights, but who are willing to fight for them no matter what the price might be. And as if it were some kind of sign from the universe to bring me back full circle, the night before we went to the Supreme Court, I found myself in Chinatown, in a Chinese restaurant, being interviewed by a journalist from China. Like my dad would have been so proud. At the end of the meal were served fortune cookies. I thought, fortune cookies, it's interesting because, growing up in a Chinese restaurant, you'd see people open them up, they'd be amused by them, sometimes people would make jokes. I didn't really think a whole lot about them. But that night, as I cracked open the cookie and I pulled out the slip of paper inside, I thought, maybe, maybe there's something to this. And so I try and get some sleep that night. It ends up just being a few blinks before I'm waking up and find myself getting out of a car and staring up at this building. This building, with its Greco-Roman-like architecture, like it was being primed for gladiator-like combat. Like it has 4 words inscribed into the front of it: equal justice under law. And I remember staring at those words thinking, I hope that's true today. I hope that's true, because almost every other time that my community came up before this government and this court, this was not the case. Because it was the same government that declared that people like those of my family could be banned from this country with the Chinese Exclusion Act, preventing people like my great-grandpa, an American citizen who was here in the 1800s, from buying property in California because we didn't want people like him. It was the same government and the same court that upheld the decision to lock away American citizens and to put them into concentration camps if they happen to be of Japanese descent. Because of safety? We did not receive equal justice under law in the past. Hopefully it would be different today. And so we get led through the court and eventually are guided to our seats. Now, turns out I'm not sitting anywhere near my attorneys. They are arguing from a table up front by this raised dais where the justices would sit. Behind them are rows and rows of chairs. It's called the members of the court section, basically reserved for attorneys that paid extra for the good seats. Behind them are rows and rows of pews. That's where us, the common people, got to sit. Now, you can imagine the scene, because as the room begins filling up, it's mostly law professors and law students and people who filed amicus briefs in this case. They see 4 Asian dudes up front in suits. Of course, they begin making assumptions, and you could feel the fingers being pointed. You could hear the whispers. And eventually someone asks if we're in the band, and yeah, we're in the Slants. And then a commotion is made. Someone is signaling for that court marshal who comes over, and they're like, hey, 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 this is Tam of the case being argued before the court today, Lee v. Tam. Doesn't he at least get to sit in the front row of the section? No, he says, I have to check with the Solicitor General. That's the guy who we're arguing against today. He leaves. 10 minutes later, he comes back. He looks at me, and he says, I'm sorry, but we're saving this seat in case someone important shows up today. I'm like, yo, it's like the perfect metaphor for my entire journey through this court case. Unseen and unimportant. And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the gavel strikes and the men and women in black robes begin filing in. And then it's off. Now, a lot of people ask me, like, what's it like? What's it like being in that room when your name is on the docket for a major case? I gotta say, that's really weird. That's really, really weird. You got all these justices. You got the Solicitor General, who's like one of the highest ranking attorneys in the country, all using my name and the name of my band. And I just can't help but feel that that's not me. That's not me. Because the band you're talking about is offensive, is doing harm to their community. And all I could think was like, you don't know me. You don't know our work. Like, you weren't there as we raised enough money to rescue a family of refugees from North Korea. You weren't there as we dedicated 100% of the profits from our second album to fund research as to why Asian American women experience higher rates of cancer than other people. And you certainly weren't there as I counseled each of those kids away from taking their own lives. You don't know me. You don't deserve to use my name or the name of my band. But of course, I just had to sit there. I couldn't say anything. Like, that's the irony of this whole thing. I am fighting for freedom of speech in the nation's highest court, and in that room, I can't say a damn thing. And so how does it feel? To be honest, it felt small, insignificant, and invisible to have my name there. And so as I'm thinking about those things, just wondering if the court will ever get it, about halfway through these arguments, a small voice pops up. It's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She asked the Solicitor General, she's like, doesn't it matter that everyone knows the Slants are Asian? They're not using the word to disparage, but to describe and to remove the sting from the term. And I remember just sitting there and thinking, yo, I think I'm in love with a Supreme Court justice. I mean, notorious RBG. She sees me. She's willing to ask those questions. And the only thing that the Solicitor General could say in response was, we found a lot of articles on the internet that suggested otherwise. And I wanted to get up and scream, no, you're talking about UrbanDictionary.com. You're not talking about my community. But of course, I just had to sit there and remain silent. So 55 minutes elapse. Oral arguments are done. We're at our lockers picking up our stuff, and my head is spinning, full of emotions, thinking, they don't get it. They don't get it. And as I join my attorneys and we begin walking down the steps of the Supreme Court, I'm looking out at the plaza in front of the court. It's filled with people, maybe a couple hundred people down there. And all I could help but think was, they don't get it either. Court's in session. There's no tourists today. Like, what are they all doing here? But as we walk down those steps, we're halfway down, and the crowd looks up and they see us. They begin erupting in applause, cheering for us as we walk down the steps. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, I don't get it. What's happening here? As we hit the plaza, these two Asian kids run up to me. Simon, our parents let us ditch school to be here. And I was like, what kind of Asian parents do you have? They're like, no, you don't get it. You don't get it. We're from California. We flew here and waited all night on that cold sidewalk to be in that room, but there were just too many people. You see, we wanted to find you, to meet you, to let you know. We're freshmen in high school. Like, for our whole lives, we heard about you. We heard about the one who's willing to fight for the dignity of our community, for us to choose what's appropriate for ourselves. We want you to know that when we graduate, we're going to go to college and study public policy development. And when we're done there, we're going to run for office. And we're going to change the system that you fought against. I just thought, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we win or lose at the Supreme Court, because we won where it mattered the most. And the hearts and the minds of the people actually affected by the laws. They saw us. And so with that, I joined my attorneys at the corner of this plaza. It's something of a media circus there. There's like cameras and microphones from journalists who had gathered all over the world. And everyone's looking at each other. You see, this happened to be my attorney's first time at the Supreme Court. Like, I caught him taking selfies up in there. And so they did not have an official statement prepared. So they look at me and they're like, Simon, do you want to say something? And I'm like, absolutely, absolutely. So I get up on the microphone and I say that which no one was willing to say or acknowledge in that courtroom. I said, if the government truly cared about fighting against racism while using the trademark office to do so, well, why didn't they begin by canceling the registrations of the KKK or Stormfront or actual hate groups? Why did they choose to wage this battle against an anti-racist band? Maybe it's because they don't actually care. They want to use so-called bad language as a distraction from bad policy. You see, I called it bad policy because we found out something very pernicious about this law. Like, if you think about it, who are the kinds of people that tend to reappropriate language? People of color and members of the LGBTQ community. It turns out it actually made us prime targets under the law, providing what they call disparate impact. You see, I was not the only one who was too Asian. Every single racial slur that you could think of for an Asian American was registered as a trademark. But whenever an Asian person applied, like when this activist named Randall Liu out of Atlanta, Georgia, applied for a registration for his t-shirts that said "Chink Proud," he was denied because it was inappropriate for him to use that word. Yet, they gave it to 8 other non-Asian people. And that's the same reason why my friends in this incredible feminist rock band out of Seattle, Washington called Thunder Pussy, when they applied to register their name, they were denied. But yet the government gave it again and again to porn company after porn company for the same word because that was acceptable, but not for the women to use it. Some people were too queer, too Asian, too feminist for the liking of our government. So when we discovered that and tried to make noise about it, they got really unhappy about it. But nobody in the news wanted to pick it up. Nobody wanted to talk about it because it was just too complex. It was too nuanced for them to share. They would rather talk about football teams that were offensive and offensive Asian American bands rather than to talk about how the law was being used against marginalized communities. 6 months later, I find myself waking up early. It's June 19th, or Juneteenth, for those of you who know, another important symbol for me. And my phone has over 700 missed notifications. So I'm like, I guess something happened. I hop on Twitter, and it's OPB, our local NPR affiliate, the same one that broke the story of an Asian American band that was touring and turning stereotypes upside down. Well, they write in a single tweet, the Supreme Court rules in favor of the slants. And later that day, I found out that decision was unanimous. So now I tour the country and share this story, wrote a book about it, because I believe it's important for people to get that nuance, to learn that the story has to be more than just assumptions, things that we assume we know from reading those headlines. Those connections have to be made. I, over the years, became a passionate advocate for our civil liberties because I read the writings of a philosopher named John Rawls. He says the rules that are the most fair are those that we would all agree to, no matter who is in charge. And that's why I believe in things like civil liberties, because that's how we guarantee our civil rights. But for me, that whole journey began by finding a name that was worth fighting for. And of course, that name was the Slants. So thank you so much for being here tonight.